we will be talking about renewing the relation between ontology and critique in the context of critical higher education research. Krystian, if you can give us the second slide. Um, all right. Before going deeper into the argument, I would like to give you a bit of context on our research, because our today presentation is in fact a fraction of a bigger work we are currently doing together with Krystian, as we are writing a book that is called "Critique as a Method in Higher Education Research: From Political Ontology to the Common." This book is due to be written by the early autumn of this year. And in this book, we try to develop critique as a method for understanding capital presence in higher education. And we, of course, draw on a tradition that is very close to us, that is, we draw on a Marxian tradition. Some information about this project, speaking more broadly, because it might be important for the argument that we will be developing today. Well, one of the important issues in our thinking in this book is the idea that crisis and critique form a sort of a nexus. So we understand critique as always being involved in certain experience of a crisis, as an intervention in a crisis. A crisis that today we will be speaking about in a bit, but of course a crisis that for us is connected, as I said already, with capital presence in the university, in the higher education sector. So this is sort of a starting point that critique, the understanding of critique that we are enveloping in the book is connected to a certain understanding of crisis. But then when we move towards giving sort of body to our understanding of critique, we are also drawing on Marx and Engels' argument from German ideology, and we try to understand critique as a sort of a movement which consists of three moments. We will be talking about this in a bit, just to put some things forward, and then hopefully we will develop them further in a bit. But those three moments we call in, against, and beyond. So critique here is understood as a sort of movement. And now an important part for our today's seminar, we believe that this critique as a movement is propelled by ontological reflection, that ontological reflection grounds critique as a movement. And in this sense, we will try to renew relation between critique and ontology in the context of today's presentation. All right, but why should we renew critique? Well, part of the story is, of course, because we can put forward a certain diagnosis that critique, in a sense, is maybe in a sort of a crisis. We have a different narratives that try to deal with the issues. Here are just some most commonly associated ideas with this diagnosis. For example, Chapelon-Boltański argument about the new spirit of capitalism that co-opted critique after May 68. Of course, the famous essay by Latour, who tried to show that critical gesture understand as a debunking, revealing, is sort of is something that we have to move away from because it only fixates upon the object on the level of fact and fairy tale. And of course, Latour is putting quite interesting argument in favor of moving away from the matters of fact towards matter of concern. So again, he's trying to show that maybe critique as a certain mode of understanding already run its course, and it's high time to develop new modes of understanding beyond certain limitation of the critical mode. We of course have more of those sort of narratives, but they all boil to certain caution towards critique, that if critique in fact run its course, then being critical is sort of involved with establishing hegemony of critique, and it serves basically merely this task. So critique is done not to, bring a sort of change, desired change in our reality, but there is an argument to be made that critique simply serves to establish its hegemony and elevate the person who introduced himself as a critic. Krystian, could you give us the next slide, please? And of course, this kind of discussions about the critique in crisis gave way to this much bigger debate about moving from critical to post-critical approach. And this is something that resonated in our field, in the field of educational studies, but also in the field of higher education studies. Probably most of you are familiar with the Manifesto for a Post-Critical Pedagogy, and later those same authors developed a book which they basically take this idea from this manifesto and try to develop them, but in the context of higher education. So there is an argument to be made that our current predicament calls for post-critical approach to university instead of developing a critical approach. What sorts of arguments are in favor of such a turn or a move from critic to post-critic? Well, first of all, a simple observation that in a sense, accumulation of critical knowledge has failed us. And I think this is something that we have to come to terms with, because this argument is simple, but it's quite strong. We are piling papers all devoted to exposing, debunking, revealing certain forces that structure our reality, that brings discontent to our reality, but the effect is just, piles of papers. Those processes are basically intact. So it's based on a quite simple observation that there is a problem with gaining critical knowledge, which don't necessarily translate well into sort of acting upon the forces that are revealed through gaining this critical knowledge. And of course, this leads authors who are in favor of post-critical approach that we should move from this understanding of critique as simply debunking, revealing the forces that structure our universities, our higher education systems, and think of a mode that will sort of take care and protect what we find dear in these systems, in our experiences of being involved in university. So although the post-critical approach is not introducing itself as anti-critical, nonetheless, it is based on a certain assumption that even if we need still critique as a sort, and we need its epistemological function, we nonetheless need to develop a new mode which will be affirmative in a sense that it will involve taking care, protecting what we hold dear, and apparently critique might not be suited from this task. So our argument will be sort of will be counter argument. In fact, we will try to argue that critic rejects to be limited merely to the negative moment, so merely to the moment of exposing, revealing certain forces that are in play in our reality. And in fact, we can develop an understanding of critic that is based on the interdependence of negative and affirmative dimensions that are internal to the concept of critic. And we believe that this task can be achieved through renewing relation between ontology and critic. Krystian, over to you.
Okay, sorry, because navigating all this thing like on my screens started to be challenging. One of the particularities of our approach is that we are trying to combine things that on the first glance are incompatible. It means Marxism and ontology, Marxism and philosophy. This is like quite challenging task to come up together, to put together. And Marxism has to be blamed. The whole tradition has to be blamed for this particularly challenging situation. And also, we need to take a blame for, as Marxists and representatives of this tradition, for the general perception of the task of the critique as solidly negative endeavor. But in order to renew the relationship between ontology and critique, we need to deep a bit deeper into the Marxist tradition and find some partners in the dialogue about the ontology and the critique. And two of our main references in this uncovering of the tradition of ontological reflection within Marxism, which we find particularly practical in renewing the dialogue between Marxism and ontological reflections, on the one side, György Lukács, and on the other, Antonio Negri. These are two names that usually are not connected together, despite the long historical dialogue and awareness of especially Antonio Negri of the works by Lukács. Lukács is usually connected with some sorts of establishing the grounds of a Western Marxism, but also giving Marxism its quite philosophical face. So these two philosophers, especially from the 60s onwards, started to philosophize in face of a general expansion of capitalist mode of production into the totality of social life, the life itself, the concept that connects Lukács and Negri perspectives is the concept of subsumption of life under capital, a process that occurred with one another shift in the focus of capitalist production and its expansion to the social sphere as such. As we claim, this process, the capitalist subsumption of the totality of social life, is something that requires not only attention, but also requires different tools that we were used to use in relationship with capitalism. What I mean by that, by this expansion of capitalism into the totality of social life, or into the life itself, these two philosophers meant that there is no outside for capital. It penetrated even our very ideas and our very experience of the being itself. It penetrated reality to the very, very core. Therefore, the strategizing ontological reflection as mode of addressing the different histories or formulations of being itself is a kind of a weapon against this capitalist subsumption. And basically, because within Marxism, within Marxist tradition, being itself is understood as a dynamic and historical reality. Being is not transhistorical. Being is something that that is formed and transformed. And task of philosophy is to strategize the different conceptions of being in order to set being free from the tight embrace of capital. Wait a while, I'll change my slide. So there's a challenging task, this task of thinking being in through the interdependence of two different modes, of the negativity and affirmativity. And this is a task of the critique. On the right side of the slide, you have a famous quote from Marx Grundrisse, one of the most, I would say, philosophical work by him, like one where he never avoids to use something that may sound for within the Marxist tradition as too much of philosophical jargon, but it's really telling. And this quote refers to the understanding of a very core concept for Marxist critique of capitalist mode of production, the concept of wealth. In fact, however, Marx wrote in Grundrisse, when the limited bourgeois form is stripped away, what is wealth other than the universality of human needs, capacities, pleasures, productive forces created through universal exchange? The absolute working out of his creative potentialities with no presupposition other than the previous historic development, where he does not produce himself in one specificity, but produce his totality, strives not to remain something he has become, but is in the absolute movement of becoming. And this absolute movement of becoming, of human essence or being itself, lays at the very core of Marx's understanding of ontology that allows to or stimulates the Marxist movement of critique. What I mean by that, like on the left side of the slide, you have like the conceptual pairs, conceptual couples, isolated individual and social individual, commodity and wealth. Like Marx uses transhistorical positioning of being in order to be able to criticize the historically emerging conceptual forms of like forming the being, like what appears in capitalism as isolated individual, in its very core may be something that Marx names as more social social collective individual. I'm trying to let somebody in, and this is challenging because of my screen, sorry. And the same goes with the commodity and wealth. Marx uses his concept of wealth that is described in this this quote in order to present the contingency of commodity as a form of this wealth. And what are this ontological positivity that we refer to in order to renew the dialogue between ontology and critique, we called after Antonio Negri and other Italian philosophers, we call the common. And we, in our genealogical work, we trace the elements of the common not in Marx's thought. And I would say that the common as ontological positivity that may offer a grounding for critical project that relies on interdependency of the negative and affirmative moments is to be found from the very start of the Marxist project. Especially nice, elegant formulation was given by Marx in his discussion of Feuerbach, this in his famous thesis on Feuerbach, where he gave the relational and dynamic idea of a essence of human being, human essence, which is in its reality, it's the ensemble of the social relationships, which are historically formed. This is exactly the common, general interconnectedness of being. We refer to the conception of the common that has a dual status, that on the one side is something ontological ground that makes any social formation productive, like every social formation of production relies on the common, on the generative productive power of being and life. And on the other side, the common is also the inscribed in every moment of history potentiality, a positive affirmative potentiality of transcending and transgressing a given historical social formation. Well,
okay, so it's becoming. Hello everyone once again. So now my task is to try to translate what Krystian said in Marxian language, in Marxian idiom, into the reality of the sector that we are all interested in. So Krystian finished with this idea of the common as a sort of having a dual status. So being both condition of possibility of a given social formation and this, at the same time being the condition of possibility of future transformation of this formation. And this is something that we build on, and I think this is quite important in our thinking to grasp this, this duality of the concept of the common. Especially that we are making a sort of argument that this category of the common can in fact be used and understood as a sort of a bloodstream of academic endeavor and its totality. So I think this is something that comes up really nicely in more works on contemporary university. I can refer, for example, here to Ron's Barnett work on ecology. So I think there is a growing understanding and a growing feeling that to come up with a sort of understanding on the contemporary university also it also means to come to terms with the deep relationality of our reality. And I think Ron, in his idea of ecology connected to university, also picks up this theme when he, for example, highlights that the university is something deeply embedded in different ecologies. It's connected to it, it's related to it. So this sort of relational thinking is something that we also find very dear, and we try to give it well, we sort of try to give it the name of the common, translate this experience of relationality into the concept of the common, which Krystian introduced us to. And I think that there are some quite strong arguments to be made that the academic endeavor as such in its core, it's based on this sort of relationality that when we're thinking about what is actually ontologically primary in academic endeavor is precisely a certain understanding of relations. On the left side of the screen, you have a quite famous quote from a very classic philosopher who in this quote says that a truly isolated investigator is impossible. An isolated investigator without bias and tradition, without forces of mental society upon him, and without the effect of the evolution of that society, would be blind and thoughtless. Thinking is a collective activity. So thinking means being together, entering relations. This is sort of a glue that holds us together. But this glue, by this glue I mean the common, runs into certain problems that we will try to reveal in the course of the rest argument. But to put it to sort of move on from this understanding that our reality, and I mean I refer here to reality of higher education, is a deeply relational understanding. We can say that in this context we can understand the common as a sort of a fundamental, non-hierarchical and self-defined social relations that binds us together, enables us to grow in this endeavor. And this very much plays on this idea that Krystian has mentioned, that the common is a condition of possibility for a given social formation. So it also plays a role here. But even if we expose this sort of relationality, as I said, this relationality runs into some immediate problems. And what kind of problems are those? Well, we think about it in a sort of by trying to expose a sort of a paradoxical nature of existence in university that is subsumed under capital. So this sort of reflection, to which Krystian already referred to when he mentioned, for example, Lukács or Antonio Negri, who ontologize their philosophical position in the context of subsumption, life under capital, returns in our argument, and leads us to a certain paradoxical nature of this existence. Paradoxical because, well, there is a contradiction basically in this experience of being immersed in university subsumed under capital. And when we are trying to pinpoint exactly how we can understand this paradoxical nature, we can refer to another famous argument, this time made by two classics of critical thinking, that is Theodor Adorno and Max Horkheimer, who in the course of their dialectic of enlightenment and the story about the Odysseus and the sirens, they talk about radical socialization that meets radical alienation. And I think this is nicely put, and it is sort of way how we can give conceptual terms to this paradoxical nature. So just to try to unpack this paradoxical nature of existence in the university subsumed under capital, we can say that on the one hand, well, academics have never been more social in their existence. And I think this is, well, for example, what we are doing here now, right? This simple meeting between, I don't know, 20 or so people, in fact, engages and mobilizes so much relations, social relations that are spanning around the globe. And it is unprecedented in our history that performing tasks as academics, in fact, involves labor, done around the world and potentially connects us to people all around the globe. But at the same time, never have been this relation so privatized and individualized. And this is in this certain sense, there is a sort of alienation from this radical socialization that we are facing more and more processes that are building upon this relationality of academic endeavor, but they are making use of it that is, well, that can be questioned, and critic is probably about questioning it. Of course, this is on the right side. You have a quote from Marx that tried to also grasp this paradoxical nature, which for him was sort of internal to capitalist society. But as time runs short, I will move on now. So, Krystian, could you bring another slide, please? And just to give you a sort of understanding of how we can put this idea of linking ontology with critique, how we can use it in the context of higher education. I will draw on an example that we are referring to in our book, also in some of our published papers. That is, I will refer to the case of Robinson Crusoe. Of course, you probably all know the story about the Robinson. Probably also you know that the term Robinsonate made quite name for itself also in philosophy, as it was a concept used by certain philosophers to expose different processes of naturalization, especially naturalization of individuality. I think that our argument plays a role in this discussion, connects to this discussion, as we try to uncover the work of academic Robinsonates within the sector in question. So just to give you understanding of what we are trying to achieve by bringing this relation of ontology and critique into the story of academic Robinsonates, we are trying to show that in the university subsumed under capital, the common, so this foundation, this ontological foundation, relational in nature, appear in its corrupted forms. This already plays in what I said in connection to the previous slide when I was trying to give an understanding of this paradoxical nature of our existence in the university subsumed under capital. That is, that radical socialization meets with radical alienation. Corruption here is, of course, making the common to appear as something else and works towards particular ends that are not that have not in aim reproduction of the common, but merely exploiting it. And I would like you now to consider persistence of Robinsonates in conceptualizations of global academia. I think there is an argument to be made that despite the fact that we observe a growing academic endeavor globally, relations that are forged in this expansions are in fact conceptualized and in fact are introduced as having an origin in individual, in Robinson. And there is a growing number of people who we refer to as preachers of academic Robinson, who are trying to show that this sort of expansion of relationality in academia today is in fact only an effect of the working of the calculative individual, Homo economicus, who collaborate, who enter into relations just to maximize his own profit. And this is a sense that I was trying to show you that there is a process of naturalization of the corrupted forms of the common. And I think here we can just point to one example of such processes in which this naturalization occurs, in which relationality of the being is covered, and a different perspective is naturalized. So a perspective of a primacy of individual is put forward. And with, of course, we know all the dramatizations that helps in this quest of naturalization. There are winners and losers, there are have and have nots, and this is, of course, all effect of a global competition in academic endeavor. So to sum it up and just give you some takeaway messages, the practice of political ontology for us precedes critique. It sets goal for critique. It reveals the common from underneath its corrupted form and asks about the possibility of acting upon the common in a process of what we call self-transformation. Because as we already said at the beginning, critique here is understood as a sort of a movement. So in fact, if we understand the relation of ontology and critique in this way, I hope that it becomes understandable that we can make an argument for interdependence of negative and affirmative moment of critique. Negative is, of course, the revealing function, but affirmative is the sense that it begins a movement which has a transformation in mind. So transformation not only of the sectors, but also of ourselves being emerged in this sector. And it does so through the work of denaturalization, so revealing the common from underneath its corrupted forms, revealing it as a constitutive category, despite other concepts used in favor of the status quo. But the work of ontology does not end in giving the beginning to the movement of critique. In fact, the common, so our category that refers to ontology, is in fact present throughout the whole movement of critique. So it mobilized different moments of critique that we are developing in this project, and it serves as a point of reference for this project. So if the movement of critique consists of three moments, so the experience of being emerged in the status quo, then of course this sort of understanding of the common that we try to put forward is of course present also in this moment. So the common ontology is something that mobilizes this movement, gives direction, and makes it possible to make a transition from one moment of critique to another. So it gives the critique its integrity. All right, I think we already extended our time, so I would like to thank you all, and I hope we can discuss these ideas during the discussion section. Thank you.
Hello, thank you very much, Jakub, and yeah, I invite you to, crushes somehow. I remember a few days ago, Andrew shared a nice quote from Hannah Arendt, and I thought that I will never agree with Hannah Arendt on the American love for making the complex things quite short. But right now, after this presentation of us, I appreciate the approach, and I'm sorry that we failed because this is only a small chunk of what needs to be said. So, if you want to contribute to the dialogue, put your hands up and shoot. Okay, no volunteers.
Sorry.
Okay, come on, Soren.
Yeah, thank you. I also wrote a little bit in the chat, but thanks a lot for this advanced conceptual unpacking, and there's so much depth to your thinking. It's always sort of unsettles my own in a way, which I really appreciate, because I'm not a Marxist. I don't come from Marxism. I don't follow the nuances and so on. So I have a simple question. I'm a simple person, and maybe I misunderstood it, but let's see. Let's see what you reply. As I wrote in the chat, it's about terminology. This term of the common, maybe that's also the paradoxicality and the contradictions that you circle around and that you're unpacking. But why use the term the common when you want to also get at dissonance and difference and otherness and so on? Coming from Levinas, again, this is an example of totality, and it can never really have that transcendent moment or element within it that you seem to embed into the concept of the common. You don't need to agree with Levinas, of course, but why use that term at all? The common, couldn't you? Why not use uncommonness or something entirely different? I'm just curious about the semantics here. Thank you.
All right, Soren. Thank you very much for this question. Of course, this is this is a big question, but I would say that for me at least, Levinas is one of philosopher that, although very different of Hegel, the one who treats the totality, the Hegelian totality, that serious. He tried to move beyond it, but he treated it very seriously. At least as his point of departure. But the common, of course, draws on a different tradition. This is speaking philosophically. Its genealogy moves us back towards the understanding of the whole, rather in Spinozian terms, very much this sort of anti-Hegelian, and by extension, I would say also anti-Levinas thinking about how we can conceptualize the whole, and at the same time being able to incorporate in this whole the question of difference, because the common, this is of course goes also in the sort of Deleuzian tradition, because the conceptualization of the common is also based to a certain extent on Deleuzian ontology, which of course try to incorporate the question of repetition and difference, right? So this is a sort of different genealogy which tries to think beyond this Hegelian model. Then there is a totality in which the elements are related only to this totality, and the totality is a sort of structure that gives every element its place. It's tried to think a much more dynamic picture in which ontological primacy is not in the whole, but it's in the relation itself. So maybe this is sort of place where when these two traditions go in these separate ways, and in a certain sense they are of course clashing with each other, because some people develop the idea of the common to combat this understanding of totality, which I understand is in the background of Levinas thinking.
Thanks.
Okay, before giving room to Svetlana, I will also join this answer to Soren, maybe putting that discussion more on the political economic grounds. I would say this philosophical tradition of the common trying to combat the other totality, the totality of capital, which is like point of departure, like the being is like in total subsumption by capital, and the common is the idea of how to escape from this tight embrace. And at the same time, I would say political economic reflection on how capital operates comes to the conclusion that one of the driving forces behind capital is the multiplication of differences. Capital operates in the subsumed sectors of social production through the difference, and absolutization of difference, at least in this tradition, puts us on the position of helplessness in front of that. But I would say Kuba provided much more nuanced philosophical genealogy, which is like hard for me to follow. But okay, Svetlana.
Thank you for your very interesting presentation, and you successfully achieved the goal to show how fruitful could be Marxism in relation to its implication to higher education, and you opened the field, the new field, which could be developed further by next generation, I would say, of social scientists. And I tell you, this being a certified teacher of Marxist-Leninism, political economy, I have the classic education in the field. So I really believe that you show the field, you revealed the field. And my question is related to the last slide of your presentation, where you, you brilliantly show how the common could be presented throughout the whole movement of critique, in, against, and beyond. It is clear, and it is very fruitful for anyone who wants to rethink his or her existence in academic profession. It is also understandable and very close to the heart of any academic how to struggle against this, especially if you do not have a symbolic capital, reputation capital, or nepotist capital, or vulgar money capital. It is also clear. But would you be so kind to show how do you see this field beyond, constructing the alternative beyond the status quo? How do you see this beyond?
Okay, I can try briefly to come up with some answers. There are I can share with you a chapter from a handbook that is upcoming, like in the fall, about Marxism and education, where I simply wrote about the existing alternatives to the capitalist higher education. But we can think about the alternatives differently. They all emerge within, against, and beyond the capitalist university. The beyond aspect are the initiatives that are like based on completely different principles. They are differentiated from the minor initiatives of self-education that emerged through the Occupy movements of the universities, and then in a more rhizomatic way spread around the country, the system, or internationally. But they can be also cooperative universities, like the example that unfortunately never really started in the UK, but it grew to have a potential. There are like institutions like Academies of Solidarity in Turkey, which is the network of academic teachers and researchers that were released from the universities after the state of exception declared by the Erdogan power, and they reproduce in a network beyond the state and the market. There are like examples of, for example, Ecuadorian Polytechnic, Salesian Polytechnic, that operates as a common pool resource governed by both students and academics in Ecuador. They are really great because they not only develop the praxis of higher education beyond the both market and the state, but at the same time they develop a great number of theories. They reflect theoretically about their practice. So I can continue and have another seminar on that, but this is like some points of where we see the beyond, because there are also, you know, the ontological potentiality of the common allows us to identify the elements of the common within our daily reality in universities. So it's not that there is no outside for the rule of capital. There are like practices in our higher education institutions that are like based on the ideas and logic of the common, like clearly. This seminar is one of the examples, I would say. So thank you for the question. And I think that Ron has written a question in the chat that Kuba wanted to answer.
Well, I can try at least.
Shall I just articulate my thought for others, and then you can come back at the question. This is a webinar in a series of webinars on ontology and higher education. I've been absolutely intrigued by what you've had to say, and I look forward very, very much to seeing what you've had to say in writing, so I can struggle with and get closer to what you've had to say, which has pleased me, if I can say like that. But I am interested in this notion of ontology, and you've touched on ontology 3 or 4 times in your talk, and what you've had to say to us today, but I wonder whether you could say a bit more, really, because I'm struggling a bit to understand what you mean by ontology. I'm very old-fashioned, and for me, ontology is a concept about what there is in the world, almost independently of human beings, at least how the world is. And I mean, just by the way, in one of your slides early on, you mentioned that there's some kind of tension between ontology and Marxism, but you didn't really quite explain that, for me at any rate, being so ignorant about Marxism. But I'd just like to hear you say a little bit more about your concept of ontology. That's really my thought. Thank you very much.
All right, well, thank you very much for your question. So this apparent contradiction between Marxism and ontology is based on, I would say, well, rather vulgar understanding of Marxism, where there is an argument that Marxism treats ontology as a site of ideology. So it rejects ontology as a ideological bourgeois concept. But this is and we try to show it by referring both to Lukács and to Negri, and that of course, and to Marx, in fact, that it is and never was the case that Marx started his critical project from making certain ontological assumptions about, as you said, about the very being and how we can understand what is and well, give some properties to this being. And now when Marxists try to tackle this problem of ontology, for example, one idea is probably familiar for you, because I think you drew on his work, Thomas Nile, who does quite a lot of work on this sort of dynamic ontology. He wrote a really interesting book on Marx, it's called Marx in Motion, when he's trying to show that Marx, in fact, in his idea of historical materialism, is coming up with a certain notion of being understood as being in motion, as dynamic being that envelops and develops throughout history. He calls it historical ontology in Marx. So I would say that, and there are of course other examples. It's quite interesting that, for example, Antonio Negri, who we mentioned, after the big fall of Italian communist movement, and when he was imprisoned, he devoted his book to Spinoza. He started to reading ethics, right? And for many people, this was very strange that one of the leading figures of this insurrection movement is devoting his next book to Spinoza and Spinoza understanding of ontology. But ontology in this tradition is this sort of also of laboratory of thought, when if we treat being as something dynamic in motion, being in motion, then we can try to basically reconnect with this affirmative stance that what we have is not what we have to have and not what we will have, right? That it brings certain hope to Marxist tradition, to Marxian thinking. It tries to put this thinking in motion through highlighting that the being is in a constant state of reconfiguration, right? And our current configuration is just one of many other potential configurations that we can imagine. So ontology, I would say, for Marxism, in one sense, is of course this dynamic historical understanding of being, but this is a certain laboratory of thought that is about bringing hope to the theory, renewing Marxian theory through highlighting that this is just one configuration, but many others are yet to come. All right, that's my answer to Ron's question.
So Kuba's answer could be summarized in brief bullet points, like Marx's position to ontology does not assume not transhistorical, like eternal forms of being that are accessible for the philosophical inquiry, rather seeing it as historical and always changeable through labor. Like this materialist approach to being assumes that human being or general productive system has an internal relationship with being itself through a praxis of production, labor, and change of themselves and the world around them in the process of producing. And this political or historical ontology is a sort of reflection that takes into account the changing forms that are expressed in thoughts that are given to this being, this historicity of being. And there is also a brilliant, very underrated text by Engels, who in the introduction to Marx's Poverty of Philosophy explains how workers were expressing a different conceptions of being, labor, and value in their struggle in the 19th century, and how they were ontologically right, like expressing their desires, giving different forms to it, but they were at the same time, at this very moment in history, theoretically wrong. But in the end, Engels' comment that they changed the practice of political ontology for him for the better. So okay, there are like too long answer to this nice question. Thank you very much. Andrew.
Thank you. Thanks, Krystian. Thanks, Kuba. I really enjoyed this. I'm enjoying trying to, again, coming from another tradition, as I said the last time, trying to think my way into the tradition with you. So thank you for doing this public thinking with us. One of the words that's kind of struck me and has stuck with me while you were talking is the notion of movement. And when you were talking about dynamic being there, in response to Ron, I was just thinking, you know, when you're talking about critique as movement, to what extent is movement a really important word there? Because I'm just wondering, are we talking about movement in the sense of, you know, phases of a critique in terms of what you're talking about within, or are we talking about movement as ontological? I'm just kind of interested in terms of how would you unpack, where does movement connect to? Where does it go to?
Super interesting question, Andrew. And this is actually something we struggle with very much, because when we are of course, the idea of critique as movement is taken from the quote from Marx and Engels from his German ideology, right? He and Engels says that critique for us is a movement, but movement gives us this idea of linearity, right? That we move from one moment to the next. And in our conceptualization, we always struggled with giving it different sort of understanding, because we see no easy causal relations between different moments of critics. It's not like you have to start in the in moment and then there is a, you know, causal movement towards against, and then from against causal movement to beyond, right? We try to thought this maybe more of as a circular. So maybe the notion of motion would be more appropriate. That movement which always has this reference to linearity, to causality, which we find problematic in our thinking and try to get rid of it. So difficult question, very much the one with which we struggle with. But yeah, I just try to give you maybe a bit of context how we understand it and how we struggle with this problem that you mentioned in your question. Krystian, would you like to add something to this?
Okay, sorry, we are in one room, so we need to, you know, establish this movement of switching it on and switching off, not to cause some noise. But there is a nice conceptualization of that in Bertels Ollmann's book, The Dance of Dialectics. And I would say, if this idea of critique is not really, we don't want to present it as something like in this clear dialectical schema, like from one to the second and to the third movement. But I would say the idea of dancing is here really nice. I find it's really productive. This is a dance of critique that you can start from every step, but in order to produce this motion of sense like dance, you need to come through different steps. So these are like, you know, like steps in the dance of the critique, if you want us to be creative. But it's strange, like it's the first time I thought about it.
Can I just come back, because I think that's really interesting, because when you were talking about earlier on as well, you were saying about the understanding of ontology is not about being the whole, but about being the relation. I think there's something really interesting to explore there in that sense of relation. That seems to be something quite new and interesting. So relation, you know, a dance is a relation as well as a movement as well. I think there's something really, really interesting to explore in that. Thank you anyway for the response.
And there is also Emma Goldman favorite famous quote, if I can't dance, this is not my revolution. And this is same here, like if I cannot dance, it's not my critique. And yeah. Okay, a joke. I hope not the final one, but if there are like questions or comments, if somebody wants to dance with us a bit more around this idea of critique, you are welcome. But it's rather a silent disco. There's no music. If not, our time has come to an end, and thank you very much. We have another seminar in April, because if you want to dance with us to the very end of this ball, there are like seminar in every month until the end of the semester. So during the next seminar in April, I've forgotten the date, but it's more or less around 20. There will be Lily Young, who will come with the ideas from her recent book, and we'll discuss the ontologies, different culturally embedded ontologies of the public and the private in Chinese and American and liberal Anglophone tradition. So you're all welcome, and thank you very much for participation. It was a super productive time.
Thank you.